Hello and welcome to the webinar on Mastering UNECE Cybersecurity Requirements today. And we would like to start with a short introduction of ourselves.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to present in front of so many of you. My name is Christopher Kusch. I'm a security consultant at ESCRYPT. I've been at ESCRYPT since 2017. Consulting clients worldwide from specialized suppliers to top 5 OEMs and currently advising multiple OEMs on the implementation of the WP.29 requirements. My core skills lie within automotive security and cryptography.
And my name is Lena Steden. I've been with ESCRYPT for more than 5 years now, and I'm also in the consulting area, working with automotive clients from all over the world and managing international projects. I have specialized in automotive security and risk management. So we are going to guide you through the UNECE regulation today, and let's have a look at the agenda. We will start with an introduction to CSMS and vehicle type approval, and then have a detailed look on how to master the UNECE cybersecurity requirements before we come to challenges and opportunities related to those requirements. And then finally, as Freddie already announced, you have the opportunity to ask questions, and we will do our very best to answer them. So Chris, let's start with the introduction.
Yes, gladly. Actually, before we go into the details of the CSMS and the vehicle type approval, let us first have a look at what the UNECE WP.29 actually is. So let's start there. It is the UNECE, the WP.29 is the World Forum for Harmonization of Vehicle Regulations. This World Forum passes international agreements, so-called UN regulations. And so far, there's well over 100 UN regulations. The WP.29 has now set up a task force for cybersecurity and over-the-air issues, the TF-CSOTA. And its objective has been to develop a new UN regulation for cybersecurity. The regulation was actually adopted and passed by the end of June, on the 24th, I believe, and will target vehicle types M and N, so primarily passenger vehicles and trucks. And the plan is, and it was adopted under the 1958 agreement. You can see the contracting parties here on the world map. The EU is highlighted here, as well as Russia and Japan. So you see that large parts of the automotive world are contracting parties of the 1958 agreements. This is the background. So let's have a look at the regulation itself. And before we do that, let's have a look at how type approval works. So on the right-hand side, quite generically, you see how type approval works. So an OEM provides a sample vehicle to a technical service who does some validation, creates a test report, and sends it to a national authority, for example, the KBA in Germany, who then grants type approval. Now, with the new regulation on cybersecurity, there are two additional things. One is a cybersecurity management system, and the other is vehicle security. So a cybersecurity management system, in short, what it is kind of a processes for up-to-date risk identification, treatment, management, security testing, but also incident detection and handling. You have to cover the entire life cycle and, interestingly, the entire supply chain. And therefore, and these processes need to be certified. So, in addition to a sample vehicle, within this new regulation, you have to provide a CSMS certificate to a technical service. The vehicle security part essentially says that you have to apply the CSMS, the cybersecurity management system, to the vehicle type that is being type approved. And to do that, you have to provide some technical documents that show and provide evidence that you applied the processes that were certified in the CSMS. Now, CSMS sounds similar to an ISMS, and we'll have a detailed look at that at the end of the webinar. For now, let's just say that the CSMS targets vehicle cybersecurity, whereas the ISMS, the information system, the security management system, targets an organization's information security. But this is how type approval works, and these are the new requirements. Before we have a closer look at the requirements themselves, let me provide some guidance on several documents that are circulating in context of this new regulation. And let's start with the regulation itself. This is, of course, the text that is to be read by everyone in this industry. It contains roughly 20 requirements for the CSMS and the vehicle security. And interestingly, it contains now what is called an Annex 5. This Annex 5 contains a list of threats and mitigations that shall be covered by OEMs. And what is interesting about that is that it mentions backend systems. So it goes beyond the classical vehicle-centered approach of cybersecurity. The regulation itself references an interpretation document, which is very worthwhile reading. It's not part of the regulation itself, but it contains explanations of the requirements. It gives examples of documents or evidence that an OEM could provide in order to show compliance with the requirements, and it's also helping regarding whether or not a requirement should be considered unfulfilled or may be considered fulfilled. So it's worthwhile reading. Also interesting about this interpretation document is that it quite heavily references the ISO SAE 21434, which is an upcoming international standard. And we'll speak about that a bit more later as well. The third pillar consists of so-called test phase reports. So there was a test phase where OEMs could participate, and it ended last summer. And they could hand in their documents to technical services, who would then give comments on these documents. There's a public test phase report available online on the website, and an ID is shown here on the slide. This is very interesting to read, and of course, during client projects, we've also seen individual test phase reports that shed some light on how technical services think about the requirements and how they judge them. Okay, having said this, let's have a look at the requirements themselves. They are abbreviated here a bit, but only a bit. And as I've mentioned, it consists of two parts. So there are requirements for the CSMS, for the cybersecurity management system, and requirements for the vehicle type security. On the left-hand side, we see the requirements for the CSMS. And what they say is essentially that you have to cover the entire life cycle of a vehicle type, from development to post-production. You have to have processes to manage cybersecurity, to identify risk for the vehicle type. And here's also the Annex 5 listed, as I've mentioned above. And interestingly, it has requirements regarding processes to monitor, detect, and respond to cyber attacks on the vehicle types, and also to react to new and evolving cyber threats and vulnerabilities, which we'll talk about more later. And also you have to cover the entire supply chain, and also we'll say some words about that. On the vehicle type security, maybe most interesting is that OEMs have to identify so-called critical elements of the vehicle type and perform exhaustive risk assessments for them, again, with referencing Annex 5. These critical elements can be anything that is related to safety or environmental protection and other things, just to give you an idea. And then also, of course, sufficient testing to verify the effectiveness of measures that you've identified, and then again to detect and prevent cyber attacks against vehicles. And again, supporting the monitoring capabilities and also to provide data forensic capabilities, which is quite interesting. Now I have mentioned quite a lot the WP.29. And as I've said, there are roughly 20 requirements, and it basically tells you the what do you have to do, but it doesn't really tell you the how. And again, let me remind you of this split between the organizational level, where the cybersecurity management system can be placed, at the project level, where the vehicle type security lies. And so the question is, how can we achieve this? And as I've mentioned, the interpretation documents quite heavily references the ISO SAE 21434. The ISO also knows this distinction between organizational level and project level, and it contains almost 200 requirements and goes a bit more into the how to achieve these requirements. And on the organizational level, it knows the term of cybersecurity audit, and at the project level, the cybersecurity assessment, which can serve as baselines for the UNECE WP.29 regulation. There are other things, and as you can see in the third pillar, because neither of them tell you how certification actually should work or how audits shall be done, there's an entire line of different work going on here, depicted on the third pillar. Finally, let's have a look at the timeline. So I've mentioned already that the UN regulation had a test phase, and it ended last summer. And then in February, we saw the first public draft of the ISO SAE 21434, and the UN was adopted, the UN regulation was adopted by the WP.29 on the 24th of June. Now we will expect to see the final draft of the ISO at the beginning of 2021, or let's say in the first quarter at least. And then on the right side of the timeline, you see the two important dates regarding the regulation, namely 2022 and 2024. In 2022, the UN regulation is applied to new vehicle types, at least in the EU and Japan. And in 2024, it's also applied to first registrations. And as you see, the first deadline is 2022, so we're less than 2 years away to master these challenges. And this is so the bridge to the second part of the talk, namely on how to master the UNECE cybersecurity requirements within this time frame. And this is where my colleague Lina will guide you through.
Yes, let's have a closer look at the requirements themselves and how we can put them into practice, into reality. As Chris mentioned before, the requirements come on 2 levels. So one on the organizational level of the company, and then one for the project or technical level. And within those 2 core requirements, we have identified 4 disciplines. So operating of a certified cybersecurity management system on organizational level, and then securing the vehicle by design, detecting and responding to security incidents across the vehicle fleet, and safe and secure updates. Those 3 are on the technical level. We noticed that the UNECE regulation is very similar to our holistic automotive lifecycle approach that we have been successfully implementing with our customers, OEMs, as well as Tier 1s for several years now. But now let's have a look at how to master all those disciplines together. Starting with the first discipline, the operation of a certified CSMS on organizational level. On this slide, you can see actual parts of the UNECE regulation. And if you recall the slides that Chris has shown a couple of minutes ago, you will see that this requirement that we have here on the slide is not much more detailed than the summary that Chris had on his slides. So it really doesn't give away much details or how to realize things. The UNECE UNECE regulation requires us to have processes to manage cybersecurity in place. That is the main part, and that includes processes for the identification and management of risks, for monitoring and responding to cybersecurity attacks, and also, that is the last sub-item of the requirement, that the OEM is able to collect all the relevant data to support analysis of potential cybersecurity attacks. So that sounds like a lot of processes. And to establish those processes, we set up a product security organization framework called PROOF, together with our partner KPMG. And this framework, this service, enables the establishment of a conformant CSMS based on the UN regulation. It follows an 8-step methodology to establish this certifiable CSMS, and is accompanied by strategic consulting and trainings just as needed. And in that way, we can master the first discipline. Let's have a look at the structured approach in greater detail. Again, the methodology is divided into the 2 levels that we have seen several times now. It is about establishing the CSMS on organizational level and reaching type approval on vehicle type level. And the part for establishing the CSMS has 3 main phases: preparation phase, implementation phase, and commissioning phase. During the preparation phase, we focus on defining the strategy and scope. We conduct a gap analysis and then derive a roadmap for the implementation of processes from the findings of that gap analysis. In the implementation phase, the actual definition of the processes is done, and we ask ourselves and the organization, so what is the organizational structure that we need, which risks do exist and how can they be monitored in the organization. We have a look at people and tools, so what tools are needed and what training approach is the correct one or the best one for the organization. And finally, we look beyond the organization itself. So what are the external stakeholders and how, for example, can the organization involve their suppliers? And finally, in the commissioning phase, we follow a plan, do, check, act cycle to achieve that the implementation is really realized and that we can ensure continuous improvement of the processes. So that is for the CSMS on organizational level, and then you need to apply those processes on project level to reach vehicle type approval. So for a vehicle type, we would start with a type approval readiness review to check if the EE architecture of the vehicle is really prepared and to see what gaps from a technical perspective still exist. We can also give you a rough indication on the required budget to close the gaps, and then we can proceed going along the ISO SAE 2144 to close those gaps and to document the implementation of CSMS on vehicle level. Now we have seen how we can master the UN regulation and its requirements on organizational level. Let's come to the project level. The second discipline is about securing the vehicles by design. And at least to us security engineers, that sounds like an intuitive thing to do and something that we have already done for years. Again, what does the UN regulation require? It requires to identify critical elements of each vehicle and then to assess and manage the corresponding risks. And finally, to also perform sufficient testing. With our consulting services, we can support you with that. So, for example, we have conducted threat and risk analysis and for OEMs and for suppliers hundreds of times for whole vehicles and EE architectures as well as for individual ECUs. And based on the results, we can come up with more detailed concepts and design how to improve the overall security. And our testing services can help you with test consulting so that you can identify what sufficient testing means for your organization or for your EE architecture. Beyond all the paperwork and the documentation, the UN regulation also requires you to actually implement those measures and to apply appropriate mitigations. The Annex 5 gives a whole list of examples how certain risks can be mitigated. So depending on the security concept, different building blocks like a cryptographic library or a secure TLS implementation that is optimized for an embedded system or an HSM in certain ECUs can be useful to handle keys or to implement secure boot. As some of you might know, we have already well-established products in the market for those building blocks. And with this combined approach of consulting and automotive security products, we can also master the second discipline. Moving on to the third discipline, it is about detecting and responding to security incidents across the vehicle fleet. So that topic sounds more challenging and newer to us. The requirement is really short and doesn't have much detail. It has 3 basic steps. You have to detect, monitor, and analyze cybersecurity attacks. So a simple requirement, but a more complex solution that we see. We suggest to do a defense in depth approach. The vehicle that you can see on the left-hand side could be equipped with an intrusion detection system and an automotive firewall to notice potential malicious events. And then the data is sent to a vehicle backend that is hosted in the cloud. You can see that green cloud in the middle of the slide. And there the findings from all the vehicles in the fleet are aggregated and automated reports are created on the activities. And then a security operations center with analysts and experts can monitor these data that have been collected and perform threat intelligence, and then, if necessary, trigger response actions to the incidents. So, for example, triggering an update process. We have partnered with Entity Security to operate a vehicle security operations center, and that enables fleet operators and OEMs to establish a permanent monitoring of their fleet and potential incidents. Our VSOC solution incorporates 3 parts, 3 of our products, but each product could also be some other solution, comparable solution. So there's an IDS solution for vehicles and fleets, as I mentioned, directly running in the vehicle. We have an automotive Ethernet firewall that can also be integrated in vehicles. And then we have Secure Guards, that is an integrated solution to provide building blocks to analyze fleet data and to create the necessary detection reports. So that has already been the third discipline. And now the fourth and last discipline, it's about the safe and secure updates. Interestingly, updates are not covered directly by the UN regulation that we have mentioned now several times. Software updates and over-the-air updates, so OTA, are not directly a security topic, but as you can imagine, good cybersecurity concepts are essential for a solid update solution. So you would want to protect the integrity and confidentiality, maybe also of your update packages as an OEM or supplier, and you want to make sure that only authorized parties can install updates in the vehicles. This topic is covered with a separate regulation under the same working group. That's why we listed as a related discipline here. We have already worked with multiple customers and enabled them to implement not only an efficient and safe OTA solution, but also a secure one. So encrypting data, signing update packages sounds like a straightforward solution, but in the doing, you also want to have an efficient and fast update process. And so there are several challenges to that, but yeah, we have solved those challenges. As you could see from the 4 steps, there are challenging and new requirements, but it's also possible to manage those and to master those. So the new topics that might sound intimidating, but from our point of view, it is possible to start with a minimal but compliant solution for cybersecurity in your automotive ecosystem, and then advance towards an efficient and maybe even strategic cybersecurity solution for your organization. And through the gap analysis that I introduced in the first discipline, it is possible to begin with and to identify the gaps, and then to establish an individual long-term roadmap so that you can reach the full cybersecurity solution for your organization step by step, and it is not too much at a time. Now we have seen all the 4 disciplines, and Chris is going to give you an overview of what challenges and opportunities we see with the upcoming regulation.
Yes, thank you, Lena. As Lena mentioned, we'd also like to talk about some challenges and opportunities that we have seen in multiple client discussions and projects. So let me start with the challenges and then also say some words about opportunities that we see here. The first challenge is obviously the timeline, which is challenging enough by its own. As I've mentioned at the first part of the talk, in 2022, the UN regulation is applied to new vehicle types, and this is less than 2 years away. The UNECE, as you may recall, consists of 2 parts, namely an organizational part and a project level part, and this really leads to a transformation process that an OEM has to go through. And there 2 years is not a lot of time. Another challenge is the following. It's that, as we've mentioned, the requirements of the UNECE state that cybersecurity has to be considered for the entire life cycle of vehicles. And what that means in particular is that cybersecurity needs to go beyond the concept and development. And that, of course, means that there have to be new teams, processes, and tools that have to be integrated into an organization. And as we've seen in multiple projects, this really poses a challenge to set them up. Furthermore, of course, within this considering cybersecurity for the entire life cycle, it's sort of a natural starting point to look at the constant developments, because this is where the traditional security engineering takes place, and lots of experience can be leveraged here, example from safety. But because the monitoring and response requirements are there, this requires fast and quick iteration of security, not just in concept and development, but also related to other departments. Because whenever there is a cybersecurity event, you need to have a delta risk assessment, you need to have a delta security concept, and then also delta implementation into your ECUs. And this puts, of course, additional demand, not just on the concept and development departments, but on other departments as well. And this is sort of the lookout for the next challenge. It impacts the customer and supplier relationship, because when there has to be something done with a software or hardware, suppliers will be affected. And so this customer-supplier relationship is not a one-time activity anymore, but it has to be a continuous activity. And this leads to the third challenge, which is the customer-supplier relationship, because as you can see here, on the left-hand side, you see the requirements of the regulation and also the corresponding requirements of the ISO SAE 21434. Integrating cybersecurity in your lifecycle is not limited to your enterprise. You need to manage cybersecurity with your suppliers. As I've mentioned, you cannot see it as a one-time activity anymore, because the security changes over the lifetime. You need a constant and continuous activity exchange between the customer and the supplier. You need to manage the security of your supplier in order to match the target security level of your product, and vice versa. If the maturity state of your supplier is not equivalent, but maybe even worse, you are not capable of achieving the desired security level of your product, and your overall cybersecurity management system is ultimately not effective. So these are three of the main challenges we see, but as promised, we'd also like to say some words about possible opportunities here. Let's start with the supplier's perspective. Suppliers are not directly affected by the UN regulation. However, we strongly suggest to prepare for these requirements already now, because they will be passed down from OEMs to suppliers in one form or another. In other words, you can gain a competitive edge by establishing a solid cybersecurity process already now in the organization, because it will hit you eventually. For the OEM perspective, it's a bit different, of course, but here the key thing to remember is that cybersecurity really has become a critical business success factor. Without cybersecurity, there's no type approval. So choosing a clever approach, for example, as Lena mentioned a couple of minutes ago, can contribute to a bigger return on investment on your cybersecurity spendings. The other one is the proactive supplier management, because there you can actively distribute risks and efforts of cybersecurity along the entire supply chain. The other one, as I've mentioned before, there's this information security management system and the automotive cybersecurity management system. I've also talked a lot about leveraging maybe processes that you have, and here this can be done. And it's one of these big picture topics, so to say. So the question is, what is the difference between an CSMS and an ISMS? And in fact, that's quite a natural question. Both the CSMS and the ISMS are security management systems, and they share similar frameworks. At the same time, they really started with a different objective. The CSMS wants to, or aims to, protect road vehicles and road users, whereas the ISMS more generally aims to protect informational assets. So the implementations must adapt to automotive and vehicle specifics with their particular objectives in terms of the CSMS. And we've noticed that this brings many different stakeholders together who speak different languages and who are used to different requirements. For example, the ISO 27000 series or TSACs on the one side, and maybe on the other side, the 26262 and ASPICE. And all of these stakeholders and their requirements are relevant and become even more relevant as modern vehicles rely more and more on IT. So the IT department really has become product relevant with direct customer impact. So some of the question is how to bring all the stakeholders together and where to draw the boundary of an ISMS and the CSMS and how to arrange the overlap most efficiently. So meeting with several clients where the IT, the information security, production and product development and quality management sits together at one table and discussing all these topics. And it's a challenging topic, but even though it's a tough challenge, I think this is also part of the solution during the journey to derive your tailored CSMS approach, similar to what Lena mentioned earlier. And so we also want to give you some takeaway messages here, namely that there should be some framework that you use. For example, KPMG and ESCRYPT together have developed Proof, a product security organizational framework, in order to master cybersecurity in such an increasingly complex ecosystem. This framework is a unified, traceable cybersecurity maturity framework to support our clients in the vehicle cybersecurity journey end to end. And as Lena mentioned, it consists of several building blocks, where at the heart of it all really there are two things, namely audits and readiness checks that yield to targeted roadmaps for the cybersecurity management system on the one hand, and the vehicle type approval programs on the other hand. So these building blocks really help you set up where you are now, what are your gaps, what other processes and experience you have can be leveraged in order to most efficiently reach a CSMS certification and vehicle type approval in terms of cybersecurity in the future. Secondly, one of the key features of this framework is that it helps to adapt to individual maturity, security strategy, and also brand positioning. So to achieve cybersecurity management system certification and vehicle type approval, you need to run through a transformation. Therefore, and this is what our current projects already illustrate, we always recommend to build on internal strengths where possible, but also to leverage external expertise and capacity where needed. And with this, we'd like to give you the chance to ask some questions.